How many plants do we need to increase our well-being? Hi, my name is Marcin Wojciech-Żebrowski and welcome to the newest episode of Urbcast, my podcast about urbanism, architecture and many more. So, time flies, and this is the 95th episode of my podcast, and we are coming very close to the 100 episodes of the podcast. And today I'm very happy to discuss extremely important topic, which is the influence of the plants and the greenery on our health, on our well-being, and how can we design our indoor space to influence that in a positive way. We might know that exposure to nature is beneficial for us and we are gaining more and more knowledge about the positive impact of bringing greenery to indoor spaces, but how much greenery do we need to feel its impact on our health? My today's guest, Kelai, shares her findings from the MOS Lab 1.0, where she and her colleagues worked with Marlies, Elbertse of Wageningen University and research to study how different volumes of greenery impacts people's well-being in indoor spaces. The data they revealed is the very first of its kind, and when scaled up can add significant value to people and the built environment in general. Kelai Diebel is the managing director of Makers of Sustainable Spaces, on a mission to deliver green and healthy buildings for our urban lives. She blends her architectural background, project management, and global perspective with a whole lot of passion for greenery to promote a clearer environment and a happier, healthier society. We are discussing about the importance of the plants, why should we talk about the cubic meters of the foliage, and what is the key in understanding the importance of plants, how many plants are needed to increase our well-being, and also can we have too many plants in our indoor environment. Welcome to the newest episode. Kelai, thank you very much for coming to Urbcast and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm very, very curious about your working methodology and how you work with the greenery. And that's why I decided to invite you and to talk about the plants and how much plants do we need to increase our well-being. But before we dive into that, I would love to ask you to introduce yourself and tell something more about MOS and also yourself.
Great, I would love to. MOS is the short name of our company, which is Makers of Sustainable Spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And we are a green design agency which works to connect people to nature. And we do that through living architecture, through nature-inclusive designs, and also through green research.
As I also read, you are on a mission to deliver the green and healthy buildings for our urban lives. And I think that it's a good moment to ask you about where did it come from? Where was the moment that you realized that the greenery is so important for our health and well-being, and that you decided to kind of, develop your career towards that idea?
Well, with so much of the world migrating to cities, we knew it's really important to increase the quality of life. And one of the main components of this can be through the reincorporation of nature and to bringing nature back into our everyday lives. So really what we're aiming to do is make it possible for more and more people to experience the benefits of nature throughout their normal hustle and bustle of the day, and not only leave the opportunity to tap into the benefits of nature on the weekends. For me personally, I first was inspired to incorporate greenery on buildings when I was living in Shanghai.
All right.
I lived there for 4 years, and living with 30 million people in such a big city, I really felt the repercussions of not having nearby access to nature. I'm originally from a suburban town in the United States. I'm from Kansas. And so I never really noticed before growing up that what it could be like to be without nature, just right around in my backyard and so on. But when I was living in Shanghai, I really had to exit the city. And when the city is so large, like a city like Shanghai, you have to go quite out of your way to come into contact with nature. And so I was really looking for opportunities in the built environment where we could make use of available space to ameliorate the environment, to offer opportunities for communities to connect and also give back to the biodiversity and the local flora and fauna of the city. And so I started looking at roof gardens. There are hundreds of thousands of square meters of rooftops in our cities, and there's a plethora of opportunities and a lot of different scales of greenery to incorporate to add value either to the environment, to communities, and overall to create a better place for people to live and enjoy their lives in cities. And then moving forward some years as well into the future, I started to look at nature in buildings because the average person is spending 90% of their life indoors. So we are now generation indoor. So that kind of, to put things into perspective, by the time you reach the age 40, you have probably spent around 36 years of your life indoors. So we are living, working, sleeping, relaxing, socializing. We spend so much time indoors. And there's a great opportunity to also incorporate nature inside and to really surround ourselves. And again, it comes back to this everyday concept. So especially we're looking at workplaces. The average person might spend 60% of their waking hours working. So these are also areas that we really like to target because we're confident that the impact can be even greater. And we have recently carried out an experiment, which I would like to tell you more about, and how we have studied the scale of indoor greenery on people.
Yes, and this is exactly something that I would love to discuss. But before that, I was actually thinking about the two things you've just mentioned. And first of them is the study saying that we spend 90% of our time indoors. And when I first saw the number, I was like really, really overwhelmed because I feel that I often go outside for a run or when I commute to work, or sometimes, of course, I try to meet friends outside. But still, when you think about it, it's true. Like most of us spend over 90% of our time indoors. And I think it, as you mentioned as well, it has enormous implications on our health and well-being. And that's why I think it's very important what you do. And that's why I wanted to talk to you. And the second thing is you've mentioned that while living in Shanghai, you had a problem with accessing the greenery because the distance to it was quite significant. And when you said that, I started to wonder if it's always like that, because I guess that it can be in Shanghai, it can be in Singapore, it can be also in many other cities, that we have the urban development, which is taking its place in the cost of the nature. But do you think it always has to be like that? Do you think that it is possible to reach some kind of symbiosis?
I have actually seen it done, so I know it's possible. There are a lot of great case studies and great examples for anyone that's had the possibility to travel to Singapore. I'm sure it stands out. There is just green everywhere. And what's really fascinating is the approach which Singapore took to have a ratio of greenery as a requirement for every development. And at one point, I think the policy was you had to have 125% of your plots green. So even if you totally cover your rooftop, you're still not there. So a lot of creative ideas came out of that. So I do think it's possible. Of course, Singapore has an incredible climate for growing plants in and on buildings. And I think there's a lot of great examples with roof gardens, indoor gardens, vertical green walls, atriums, courtyards, balcony gardens. There's so many places where we can integrate greenery. And that's what we're looking at Moss in our team. So we have a team of architects, interior architects, ecologists, plant specialists, and product designers. And so we look throughout the built environment for ways to creatively and technically integrate greenery into all these places which we see a possibility.
And that's a perfect introduction to our key theme of our discussion. We will discuss the data and why a higher volume of greenery benefits us, but I'm curious about what does being with plants make to us, if we could just start with very basic things.
I think for everyone, they have their own association with nature. And for me, it's being around plants and and feeling connected to nature is really a sense of belonging. And it's about harmony, and it's where I can feel joy and sort of observe the environment around me without having to think too much about it, but just being able to enjoy it. And I think that has a really great impact on how one person considers themselves in a space. And I think that is really the power of nature. And you can ask anyone, and I'm sure they have a slightly different reply, but I think it's so special to be able to surround yourselves in something which is growing, and it's dynamic, and it's ever changing. Just so much beauty to see in nature when you start looking either far away at the scale and the structure of how this plant has evolved, or you look up close and you see the details and the textures, and all the line work in a leaf can be quite mind-blowing if you take the time to really observe it.
And does also time influence the benefits of us being with the plants? Because one thing is just to have a short 5 minutes walk on the way to your work and just go to a park and see a tree. But in your study, you also talk about the prolonged exposure to plants. What should we know about this element?
Yeah, every bit helps. And you can even see beautiful depictions and studies of the brain after a 5-minute exposure to nature versus just sitting in a room, where you see a lot more areas of the brain lighting up and being stimulated. So the exact duration of time, to be honest, I don't know the right recipe. I think it also depends on how much time you direct your attention towards screen. So even if you sit around it and you only look at your smartphone the whole time, maybe it doesn't have the same effect.
And we all do it too much nowadays.
Maybe we need to just surround ourselves in a virtual reality on our phones of green. That could also help. That's something also we want to look at in the future.
It would be an interesting study to do it in the virtual reality.
Maybe the Moss Lab 5.0.
Yes, maybe that's the thing for another study, but sticking to the one that you carried out. So the main question that I really want to answer in this conversation with you, Kelai, is how many plants are needed to increase our well-being? But maybe let's start with the story behind the study. What was your main motivation to study that aspect?
Well, nowadays, a lot of people understand the importance of having nature around, especially after the lockdown. People understood how valuable it was to be able to go outside and to be able to take some walks. And more people brought houseplants into their homes than ever before. The houseplant sales just went sky high. And so I think that part is now understood. So we've already come a good way to have that understanding. And the next part is really to understand the right recipe for design. So unlike building materials, working with greenery is, well, it's alive. These are living organisms. And so the recipe for designing with plants and buildings is not intuitive. At Moss, we believe that having a larger impact of green, working with large gestures, really immersive designs, will have a better impact and a better experience for people visiting the building. But until now, we've only been speculating. And we really wanted to carry out this research experiment with the University of Wageningen to understand more in terms of the data behind how certain green designs impact visitors and impact occupants in buildings. And so one of the things that we really wanted to understand was about the amount of greenery. If I have one plant on my desk, or if I have 100 plants in my office, which one is going to lead to more benefits in terms of productivity, in terms of reducing stress, and in terms of my overall satisfaction to be in that place and my engagement in that place. And so we carried out this experiment with the University of Wageningen to test out 3 different scenarios. And we were really happy with the results.
And what was that breakthrough for our progressive understanding of the importance of plants in your study?
Well, when measuring the impact which plants can have on people, it's really important to, in our opinion, to work with the cubic metrics of the foliage. So in the past, the well-building standard has really been the only entity which was also looking at a set amount of green. So they actually looked at the square meters. But you can imagine when only looking at the square meters, I can have one plant which is small and low to the ground, or I can have one plant which touches the ceiling. And so that has a really big difference when you look at what's the right amount and how can we create a consistent impact. So that's why we actually wanted to look at the cubic metrics. So you can see how between the square meters and the cubic meters, it really can make a really big difference on the impact.
Mm-hmm.
So what we wanted to find out was the different effects of 0% of the total volume of a room green, 0.5 of the total green volume. And this 0.5 translates roughly to 1 square meter. So in the flat surface, it's kind of like an average office. So you have perhaps an office room with a few desks and a few plants in the corner. That's what the 0.5% looks like in scale. And then we also tested the 8%, which on average is the amount of greenery that Moss incorporates into our projects.
So would you say that the more the better? Because I'm wondering, in terms of those scenarios that you use for your research, I'm just tempted to think, why not to put more greenery? Why couldn't we add 25% or 30%?
Yeah, we would love to continue looking at more scenarios. We wanted to just start with these 3 and see what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And the outcome of the findings concluded that the most favorable amount of green was directly related to the 8% scenario.
Mm-hmm.
And we were obviously very pleased to see that, because this is how we also execute greenery into many of our own projects.
Mm-hmm.
And so the 8% scenario obviously had the highest volume of plants, and it had really clear results on the participants' heart rate and also therefore their stress levels. The setup of the research was really interesting, actually. So we worked with Marlies, Elbertse from the University of Wageningen. And what she did is actually she invited participants for what they thought was a survey of their Fitbit, their smartwatch.
Uh-huh.
Little did they know that each time that they visited the location over the next month, they were invited 3 times, and each time they were set in a different space of greenery. They actually were under the understanding that they were going to carry out Sudoku puzzles and be observed on the heart rate and stress levels on their Fitbit. So I love how the researcher approached this, and she set up the different scenarios with the different percentages of greenery. And she found that adding more plants in the space improves people to be less stressed. And it also gives them the idea to be less stressed. So not only were they actually monitored on their Fitbits, but they were also surveyed after. And we find that really important, that people also perceive that they were less stressed. They perceive that they were more productive, or that they did better on the tests.
But did they realize that it's because of the amount of plants, or were they just surprised themselves that they are performing very well?
So that's a really interesting question. And I checked with Marlies, our researcher, and she said that no one commented specifically on the plants in the room.
Interesting.
But someone commented like, oh, the room is so nice one time, like when they were in the higher plant volume room.
From the one side, the greenery is so important, but from the other side, we are not even aware how beneficial it is for us. So I'm wondering here, if you are working with developers or maybe architecture offices, of course, besides this study that you've carried out, because I think it's a big help, but how could you convince to invest more money into the plants? Because I assume that it's not such an easy thing to say to your client, just, buy a lot of plants and the performance will increase. So how could you tackle that?
That's also a really good question. In the last 5 to 10 years, we really did have to convince people. And now, more than this experiment, there's a lot more data that shows that being surrounded in nature and having plants in your workplace, and that it has a really positive impact on workplace satisfaction, on engagement, on productivity, on focus, on stress. So there's all these things that are supporting having greenery in buildings. And so actually the stakeholders in office environments are now really eager to bring green into the office. And at Moss, we're so happy that also we're really busy to now work for a lot of corporate environments as well, because the companies are understanding that to retain talent, to attract talent, to get people into the office, to get them back into the office after the pandemic,
Uh-huh.
you need a nice amenity in your space. And there is the profound impact of having a large scale greenery in your office that just, it really touches people and it makes them feel connected, more connected to the space. And beyond that, there's also the science that reports on how your employees will be more productive. And so I think CEOs can't look beyond that point. And especially when you consider how the average company spends 90% of company costs on employees, on employee salaries and bonuses. If you can improve the productivity of an employee, well, then you can already have the return on investment, which was brought in for the plants to be integrated.
And do you think that we are moving more towards this culture of greenery in our offices? Because I remember that it was very famous many years ago to have all those different benefit systems for the employees, and you could have a gym pass or some additional coupons to some restaurant or whatever. Do you think that now people will be eager to accept the increased amount of greenery in their workplace as some kind of a benefit for them?
Absolutely. And I also think that the plant market shows you that this is already going on. Plant sales have they are just so high right now. It's even the market is struggling to keep up. So yeah, more people purchased houseplants in the last years than ever before in history. And so yeah, also bringing that amenity into the workplace is it's now really taking off. And we're getting so many interesting requests from clients that they want to have green in their workplace and they don't want it to be just loose pots in a corner, but they really want to have plants integrated into the tables, and they want to have the hanging green in the atrium, and they want to have a nature walk throughout the entire space on the main route. So we are now really met with those, grand visions for integrating green in spaces. And I think that this is, going to be really a standard moving forward. And we see how the well building standard has also instated some baselines for how much green to have in offices. And I think that this is really the starting point. And we are really wrapping our minds around the possibilities and seeing, I think over time that people will, if you take green out of your space, well, it's almost like someone turned off the lights. So I think it's now becoming more and more of a standard.
Can you just say something more about the WELL standards to those of you who are not aware? What does it stand for?
Absolutely. The WELL building standard is the first of its kind, which is a building standard for health. So, of course, we have LEED, which is about a standard for sustainability. And we have BREEAM as well, which is also a standard for sustainability and for ecology, for water storage. So those standards are really focused on how a building is sustainable for its environment. And the WELL building standard is about how a building is healthy for its occupants. So it's completely occupant driven. And it looks at everything from clean water in your space, optimal acoustics, optimal light, as well as reducing toxins of materials in the space. One of my favorite features as well is that you have to have a prominent staircase to really encourage people to take the stairs rather than the elevator. So it's really encouraging people to use the building in a healthy way, to eat healthy diets, and also to have a large exposure to nature. So it looks at both indoor greenery and outdoor greenery. It looks at viewpoints for nature. So when you have a view outdoors or when you have a view to greenery inside your building. And the WELL building standard is now on its second version. And it's increasingly growing the amount of greenery which is required.
When you mentioned before that the sales of the plants skyrocketed, I just thought about the bikes as well. I remember that at the beginning of the pandemic, there were many European cities, especially that started to creating those temporary bike lanes. And I heard that, I was reading actually that the bike shops ran out of bikes because people realized that the bike is the way to go around the city, and they didn't want to use the public transportation because of it was just too crowded in there. And at some point, I remember an example from Copenhagen. There were so many bikes on the bike lanes that people were discouraged to bike because there were the bike traffic jams all the time. And my thought for now, my question is, if we relate it to plants, can we have too many plants in our indoor environment? Because referring to the study, I remember that I read that some people said that they wouldn't be able to focus if there were too many plants in the room.
Yeah, exactly. And I think in some of the participant surveys after the experiment, we were asking people, so, okay, now that you know this was the difference in the room, what do you think about it? And indeed, one of the comments was, well, I think I would be distracted if there was too much green. Some participants said, oh, I would be worried about the maintenance. Little do they know that actually in our projects, we work with maintenance parties, which take care of the gardens, and they are responsible for the thriving gardens over time. But actually, that's a good point, that if someone is going to be daydreaming and looking at the plants which are there, will that have a negative impact? And I think that really depends on the person, because some people say, yeah, I want more green and I feel better in it and I can concentrate better. And others say, yeah, maybe it's better to have just a little bit in my workplace. I like to know it's there, but I don't want to lose my focus on work and only focus on the plants. So we respect that, which is why in our projects, we really aim for working also with different scales throughout the space. So I can give an example of a new project we're working on in Amsterdam, where we are in one area creating a botanical library, which is a double height space. It's flooded with light. There's 4-meter high palm at the center of the space and a really robust large planter with a lot of tropical plants at different heights. And then we also have hanging plants coming down from the top. And we have a lot of lounge chairs where people can really sit and be surrounded in this space. So you can imagine that this is a very intense green gesture. This is a big statement piece. However, also in the same building, we have workstations where you have only a small amount of green in those areas. And actually what we did for this project is we took the opportunity to carry out workshops with the employees and to understand, to hear their voices. And so some of the cues that we picked up on those workshops really led our design decisions to say, okay, in the work floors, a little bit less green. But then we want to have these escape rooms where people, when they want to dive into it and they want to take a break and reset, they have the opportunity to do that. And so I think it's really important not to say, okay, we need to paint green throughout all of our buildings and have plants every which way. And, you shouldn't have to have a machete to get to your workstation, but you should have an opportunity to go to those places when you want to. And actually, this is something which the well building standard works with a lot as well. So especially for thermal comfort, not everybody feels comfortable at the same temperature in a room. So the well building standard also has features about how you need to provide a certain amount of variety for people. And I think that that's really important to respect in designing for people.
I think it directly responds to the question I had before. Why shouldn't we just put more greenery? Why shouldn't we test the 40% scenarios of greenery inside? But I think that then it could lead to this urban jungle, and maybe not everyone is feeling well in such a, or maybe can't focus in such an environment. Personally, I think that I would love to work in such an environment, and I could feel very relaxed and more focused probably as well. But I understand that there might be sometimes too much of plants. Unfortunately, I need to say, because I think I love them as well. One more question, actually.
Sure.
If it comes to the plants and the amount of it, if we start placing so many greenery, so many plants indoors in our workspaces or in our homes, can it be that it will make us lazy to visit the real nature? So I mean here a forest or a park, because we might just feel that we kind of satisfy our need of the greenery around with our indoor environment. So wouldn't it be threatening to our contact with the nature outside?
I think it's hard to get in the way of your basic need to get outside and get fresh air and to walk. I think that would be an absolute extreme. But it's hard to say. Maybe for some person that might be the case. Another project we're working on actually would be built in Iceland. And we aim to develop biodomes
Oh, wow.
on the edge of Reykjavik. So Iceland is a country which suffers more from seasonal depression than anywhere else in Europe. And what we aim to do there is create these 365-day-a-year oases where people can escape the dark and coldness, and they can go into these areas and also walk around. So even at a large scale, perhaps it could work the other way to get people to also walk around in these green ecosystems, which are warm and humid and full of life and also inspiring and uplifting in another way where maybe it's not possible.
That's actually one of the last questions I wanted to ask, because you've mentioned this project in Iceland. And yeah, I think that's what you do in Makers of Sustainable Spaces. It's just very research based. So I was wondering, what is like the next project that you are really looking forward to? Is it some more research, or is it a project of building something like in Iceland?
Well, at Moss, our mission is to connect people to nature. And we believe there's a lot of different ways of doing that. It can be through design projects, it can be through research and advocacy, or it could even be through an art project or perhaps a transportation project. And I don't want to give too much away because we're going to be making a reveal in July. But we have some new ideas about engaging with people in nature in ways which they might not have expected. And so we would love to also continue working on large-scale design projects and making large statements of greenery in the built environment, but also perhaps even working with exhibition design or perhaps even working on a nature restoration project. So we have a lot of new and fun things in the mix. And yeah, please check us out online, follow us on Instagram, and see what we're going to be up to.
That's amazing. I will add the links as well to the research as well, to the episode's description. So of course, I encourage everyone to just visit your website, your social media, and see your beautiful work. And to end on this green and of course plants note, I just wanted to ask you the final question, which is directly the title question of this episode as well. So if you could just answer, if of course answer is possible, Kelai, how many plants do we need to increase our well-being?
I would say you should work to have an 8% spatial volume of greenery in your space, as now we have proven that it leads to lowering stress, lowering perceived stress, increasing productivity, increasing perceived productivity, and overall it leads to an individual to enjoy a space more than when it might not have plants.
Okay, that's a very good and direct answer. Thank you for that. And on top of that, I would like to ask you for a recommendation, and this time it would be a book recommendation or maybe an interesting read that you could share with the listeners. And of course, it could be related to the topic. That would be great.
Oh, nice. Well, there's a lot of good options. I would say Darwin Comes to Town really stands out. This is a book by Menno Schulthausen, and he is an urban ecologist. And so his book is about how the urban jungle drives evolution. And I think when a lot of us are dealing with climate anxiety, this is a really uplifting book that actually talks about how evolution of cities, as it's happening so fastly, so quickly, actually there's still a lot of hope that the ecological population can adapt to our city environments. And there's some really inspiring examples about how nature evolves with us as well, and us on the other side, alongside nature as well.
Thank you, Kelai, for this amazing recommendation. I will, of course, add it to the episode description as well, because I think it's just very useful if anyone would like to dive into the topic more, besides, of course, getting to know your research as well and your other projects. And with that, I would like to thank you very much for being a part of Urbcast. And thank you for coming to the show and sharing this knowledge behind the plants in our environment.
Yes, Marcin, thank you so much for the time. I always love an opportunity to talk about how we are bringing nature into cities. And it's been a real pleasure to be a part of Urbcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the episode with Kelai, and I hope that it was an interesting episode for you, and especially that we discussed about this extremely important topic of the greenery and its influence on our health. If you would like to get to know about the research study that we've been discussing, feel free to visit Moss Makers of Sustainable Spaces website and social media. Also, feel free to visit Urbcast social media and the website urbcast.pl as well. Thank you very much and talk to you soon.